children to grow up not knowing. I don't want them to know about the horrors of the Holocaust. That's not what I'm wanting them to know about. I want them to know about what led to the horrors of the Holocaust. And I want children to recognize how it happens, how conspiracy theories and misinformation and fake news, all those dreadful things that happen, what it can lead to. I mean, the very first day I started school, and I knew what anti-Semitism meant. We talked about it at home. I'd observed it. I knew what it meant, but I didn't know how it felt. And on my very first day, I was called a dirty Jew, all sorts of awful, really bad names. And I learned how it felt, how anti-Semitism felt like. And, you know, my time at school was very unhappy. Nobody would play with me because I was a Jew. I always had to sit at the back of the class or stand at the back of the class because I was a Jew. I wasn't included in things like, you know, if they picked teams for games or parts for plays or something nice, you know, that happens at school, I was never included, never. Every year, St. Nicholas used to come to the school to give the children little presents who'd been good all year. And he'd come into the classroom and with this big sack and put it on the table and on the teacher's table. He had the register, and he could call out all the names of all the children who'd been good all year, give them little toys, and then he'd say, now for all the children who've been bad all year. I was the only Jewish child in the class. I was the only one left. Called out my name. I used to have to stand in front of him, and he'd raise his birch rod. And then he'd never really hurt me, but he'd pretend to hurt me. And that used to make all the other children laugh. And what was worse, it made the teachers laugh. Well, one day, when I was standing in the playground watching the other children play, a little girl called Gertie came up to me. And she said, "Do you want to play?" And I said, "Yes." And we played, you know, just like that. And the next day she came up to me and she said, "Do you want to play?" And I said, "Yes." And we played. And then we played every day. And Gertie came to my home to play. And she was my first real friend. And one day I said to Gertie, "How come you play with me? Don't you know that I'm a Jew?" And Gertie said, "I don't care what you are, as long as you're kind. My mum says I don't have to do what everybody else is doing. My mum says I've got to do what I know is right. And if I want to play with you, I'll play with you." Now, I mean, how brave was that? And you know, because she did that, the other children wouldn't play with her. And they called her a dirty Jew lover. Well, my father was a lawyer. He was a defense lawyer. I don't think they have it in here or in America, just defense. And he used to defend people who got into trouble and couldn't pay much. But he loved the job. And of course, on the very first day after the Anschluss, he lost his office. A Nazi lawyer came into his office and said, "You have to clear out, it's my office now." And because the laws had come in, all the Nuremberg laws had come in Austria overnight after the Anschluss, the day after. It wasn't like in Germany, incrementally all the racist laws became law. In Austria, they became law overnight. And I was expelled from school. My father lost his office. We lost our home. I was an only child, but I had a cousin that I was very much kind of brought up with. He was exactly a year older than me. His birthday was one day before mine, and we called him Bubi because that was a German word meaning little boy, and he didn't mind. He was called Bubi even when he was a big boy. He was very kind. They partly lived in Czechoslovakia, so they went to Czechoslovakia immediately back, and but they were not able to get away. They were not amongst the lucky ones. No. He didn't survive. My father, the day of the Anschluss, that evening, said to us, I'm not a pessimist. I'm not saying this is going to get worse, but I'm not an optimist. I'm not saying it'll get better. I'm a realist. And from tomorrow on, we start finding a country to go to. And they did. They tried and tried. I think they tried every country in the world. And it wasn't until after Kristallnacht, when the rest of the world began to take some notice, that we got visas to come to England. Yeah. My father was born in Czechoslovakia, and my mother was born in Hungary. My father, after the end of the First World War, in which he was a lieutenant, he chose Austrian citizenship. Both my mother and my father took Austrian citizenship. We all know that Austria was far behind other countries. It took a long time for them to accept that they were perpetrators and not victims. For years and years and years, I followed what my mother taught me, which was never ever to set foot in Austria again. But then when I had children and grandchildren, and I always told them the stories, the family stories, they wanted to know where this happened, and they wanted to be there. So I took my children and my grandchildren at various times back to Vienna. Some stays were good, some stays were bad, but I did do that.